Today's daf we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Kuf Aleph. The registration for the Siyum is up. So again, the Siyum will be Wednesday, April 9th. Monday, which is why I accidentally said Monday. Next week on Monday will be a Shiur, a special Shiur in Modi'in with Rabbanit Dr. Michelle Kaczynski. If anyone happens to be around, wants to go. Registration for that is on the Hebrew side of our site on the homepage, and registration for the English Siyum is on the homepage at the top of the page. So please register. I'll be speaking, finishing the daf, and Dr. Ayelet Lipson will be speaking also. And it's going to be an interesting Siyum as usual. And we'll get started. So we have what we did yesterday at the end of the daf, just to remind you what we're up to. We talked about reading Sfarim Chitzoniyim, that you're not allowed. Someone who reads Sfarim Chitzoniyim doesn't have a part in the world to come, which we said were the books of the Tzdukim, which again, this goes back to, against the rabbinic traditions. But Rav Yosef added, even Ben Sira, you're not allowed to read because it's a waste of time, basically. You should be learning Torah instead. And then he proceeded to, Abaya had to figure out what's so bad about Ben Sira. A lot of the stuff they say it says in our Torah as well. But then basically they found something that was a useless statement, and they say statements like that. And then Rabbi Yosef comes back to say, well, there are things in Ben Sira that are valuable, went into them. And the last one we saw was a drasha on this pasuk in Mishle. And that's where we then got off on a tangent about different ways to understand the pasuk, which is Kol Yimei Ani Ra'im, all the days of a poor person are bad, and Tov Lev Mishtet. And someone who's Tov Lev, his life will be a party, or someone, with a right that there's someone whose life will be bad, and there's someone whose life will be good, and we're trying to figure out who is who and what's what. So we had different interpretations. We said either it's if you learn Talmud or you learn Mishnah, because the Talmud people suffer because they don't really understand, versus the Mishnah where it's much easier to understand. Or the opposite, which is, no, with the Mishnah, you don't really understand because you might understand what you're reading, but you don't really understand the meaning of all of it, and you don't know how to paskin and all that. Whereas Gemara, you really get to the depths of it, and that's someone who's going to be really happy because they've understood the Talmud, and everything in its entirety. Then we saw the next one was someone who has a bad wife versus someone who has a good wife. And that will, you'll have a rough life if you marry someone bad. You'll have a good life if you marry someone good. Then we had an Easternese, someone who's very particular about everything, right? You're not going to live a good life if every little thing bothers you. You should not tell you someone who's calm about things, doesn't really care about all those things, then it will be better for him. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, this is where we ended. The last one was Rahman, someone who's very compassionate and feels the pain of other people. Well, they're going to struggle in life because it's hard. There's a lot of suffering around. We're going to get back to the theme of suffering later today, and it's hard to bear that. Whereas someone who's achzari, who doesn't really care, well, he'll have a hunky-dory life, won't be bothered by things. No, again, doesn't mean here that that's a good thing, right? Until now, we've been saying this is better, this is worse. Or maybe Easternese is not, so what if somebody's an Easternese and they're very particular about things? So it's not a bad thing necessarily. It just means you'll struggle more in life. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omer, end of Kuf Hamud Bet, Kol Yimei Oni Ra'im, Zeh Shedato Ktsara, V'tov Lev Mishet Tamid, Zeh Shedato Rechava. Okay, here there's a bunch of different interpretations of what this means, Dato Ktsara, Dato Rechava. Rashi gives one interpretation. I'll just go with that for now. That Misim Lelibo Kol Da'agol Chavero. You're a worrier. Okay, someone who's a worrier, well, no, right? It'll be hard for you in life. And Tov Lev Mishet Tamid, Dato Rechava, right? Doesn't really worry about anything. Sabab, right? Everything's sababa. Okay, it's all fine. But there's different interpretations what exactly this means. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Kol Yimei On Yira'im. Now, Yeshua ben Levi, who gave the last interpretation, he says, wait, something in this pasuk doesn't make sense. Kol Yimei On Yira'im, and we actually saw this sugi in Ketubot and Bava Batra, so it might sound familiar. What do you mean all the days of a poor person are bad? What do you mean? There's good days. How do we know there's good days? Well, Ha'ika Shabbatot ve'Yamim Tovim. Shabbat and Yom Tov. What's the definition of Yom Tov, right? What are the words literally? A good day. So you can't say the days are bad when it's coined as a good day. So the answer, Kiddush Shmuel, as Shmuel says, I always love this line, De'amar Shmuel, Shino Veset Chilat Chole Me'ayin. When you change your schedule, okay, for those who love having their schedule and their routines, right? A break in routine is the start of disease, okay, is the start of intestine problems or whatever. But the idea being that people like their routine. And for the poor person, when it's Shabbat, it's not their routine and it's very hard for them. So it's not necessarily a good sign. Okay, so now we have, right, and this is, I think, the most, right, the most you see this. I mean, it happens in all people, but especially kids, right? The day, right, every day of the week, they go, they have their schedule, and then Shabbat, there's no clear schedule, and everything's topsy-turvy. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to get off on some other things. Akorei pasuk shel Shir HaShirim ve'oseh oto kemin zemer. If you read a pasuk in Shir HaShirim and you make it like a song, meaning you treat it like a secular love song, okay? And some of the commentators saying you don't read it with the taamei hamikra, the way it's supposed to be read with all the the trup. Then, or, well, let's keep continuing. Hakorei pasuk bebeit mishtaot. If you read a pasuk at a party, okay, and probably they were getting to this because tov lev mishtet tamid, right, and the issue of parties. Mishtaot bebeit mishtaot below zmano. You read a pasuk at a party, not in its time. Okay, what does this mean, not in its time? What it seems to mean is if you're sitting at a party and everybody's drinking or whatever, and then you start reciting psukim kind of like in a non-appropriate manner. Okay, it seems to be the issue is a manner, not appropriate time, like it's not relevant here while everyone's drinking and doing what they're doing. Mevi ra'ala olam, you bring bad to the world. Okay, now they're having this image what's happening in Shamayim when you do this. It's like the Torah wears a sack, like sackcloth, a sign of mourning. Ve'omedet lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and goes up and stands before God. Ve'omeret lefanav, and says before God, Ribono shel olam, aseuni banecha ki kinor shemenagnim bo leitzim. Your sons turn me into a harp that the people who waste their time, the leitzim, doing foolish things, that they're using it. Okay, and that's not appropriate for me. What have you done to me? What have they done to me? Amarla, but here comes God to try to protect us. God says back, BT, my daughter, meaning the Jews, what do you want them to do? They're saying a pasuk when they're at a party. What's wrong with that? You want them not to be saying pasukim? That doesn't seem right. So comes the Torah and says, no, God, I'm going to explain it to you, right? Which is kind of ironic what they know better than God. But again, this is just kind of explaining. Even if God were to try to support us on this one, we don't have a good claim. So they say, Ribono shel olam, im ba'alei mikrahin yasku b'Torah u'b'neviim u'b'ktuvim. So this is what they should be doing. If they know Torah, they should be reading the psukim from the Torah. Im ba'alei Mishnah, in other words, reading them appropriately, not singing them as like a beer song, and being inappropriate about it. But if they know Torah, they should sit and be learning Torah while they're eating. Im ba'alei mishnayim yasku b'mishnah b'halachot u'ba'ahaga gadol. Okay, if they're learning, they're Mishnah learners, they should learn Mishnah, halachot, gadol. That's what they should be doing. Im ba'alei Talmud hen, if they're ba'alei Talmud, yasku b'hilchot Pesach b'Pesach. Okay, appropriate. They should be learning the hilchot of Pesach on Pesach, right? The hilchot atzeret ba'atzeret. This goes back to what we said before about the times for learning things. Okay, so they say, and hilchot hachag b'chag. Okay, so if it's Shavuot, they should be learning the halachot of Shavuot. If it's Chag, if it's Sukkot, they should be learning the halachot of Sukkot. Right, that's what they say a month before Pesach, which is the time we're in now. You should be learning the halachot of Pesach. So if they really know how to learn halacha properly, that's what they should be learning. So that's what the Torah says. This is what they're doing is not that. He'id Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Chananya. Kol hakorei pasuk b'zmano. Now here we get the reverse, which is what if you read a pasuk in its appropriate time, meaning you learn Torah in its proper way, in its proper time. Maybe tova olam. Okay, before they bring bad to the world. These people bring good to the world. Shneimar v'davar b'ito matov. Pasuk from Mishlei. Right, something in its proper time is good. Okay, and here they're saying this is referring to words of Torah. Valochesh alamaka. Somebody who does an incantation. Now we're back to the Mishnah. Somebody who does an incantation on a wound. If you remember the Mishnah had said, and while they're doing this incantation, right, what do they say? What's their incantation? They say kol machala. They say this pasuk, kol machala asher samti b'Mitzrayim. I want you to listen carefully to the pasuk. There's a problem with this pasuk. Maybe you can figure it out by the time we get there later on in today's daf. Kol ha'machalash or something b'Mitzrayim, all the diseases I brought or problems that I gave to the Mitzrayim in Mitzrayim in Egypt, lo asim alecha, I will not put upon you, ki ani Hashem rofecha, because I am God who is your healer. Okay, we'll get back to that. But right now, if you do that, you have no share in the world to come. So what's the issue here? What exactly is going on? Amar Rabbi Yochanan uberokekba. This is people who would spit on their wound, and then they would say the incantation. And once you spit on the wound, and then right in front of all that saliva, you're going to say God's name. That's not appropriate. You don't say God's name with the saliva there. Itma, there's a statement that some rabbis said. We're going to see Rab and Rabbi Chanina. Rav amar afilu negat tzara'at, Rabbi Chanina amar afilu vayikal Moshe. Even if you conjure up one of these other psukim, which don't have the name of God, as the first Rabbi Yochanan said, the whole problem is you're mentioning God's name. So Rav and Rabbi Chanina each say if you mention some other pasuk, like the one about negat tzara'at, which has to do somewhat with healing, but doesn't say God's name at all, or you say this pasuk Vayikra Moshe, okay, which is the first pasuk in Vayikra, which also doesn't really have to do at all even with healing or anything else, and it doesn't have God's name, but it's still a problem. Okay, any pasuk. So this seems to be a machloket, and the question is, what's the machloket? So one obvious machloket between these two opinions and the previous is that even if you don't use God's name, it's still a problem. The question is, they don't mention the spitting. So some people think, some of the commentaries says machloket. Do they also think that even without spitting, it's a problem? Or are they just assuming, yes, obviously if you spit, it's only then it's a problem, but even if you don't mention God's name. So there's a debate here about what exactly the machloket is. Tanu Rabbanan. Now, because we talked about incantations, we're going to get totally off topic and talk about things that you can do on Shabbat for medicinal purposes. You might remember we learned this for those who learn Masechet Shabbat. There's things that you could do for medicinal purposes. Usually you can't. Why not? Because we're worried, the rabbis forbade it. We're worried that maybe you'll grind up medications. Okay, you'll grind up spices to make a medication. That's forbidden on Shabbat. When are you allowed to? There's all different rules. So if you're in a dangerous situation, of course, right? You're cholesh sheyesh bo sakana, even though it's not pikuach nefesh, but still there's danger. Obviously, we're allowed to. If you're not sick in a kind of danger, but you're lying in bed, like you're that sick, you have to lie in bed, then yes. But less than that, no. However, there's certain ways where you can. For example, if it's, let's say, a drink that everybody drinks, also when they're healthy, also when you're sick, then it's not so clear you're doing it for medicinal purposes and you're allowed to drink it or something like that. So not just drinking, but also an action you might do for medicinal purposes. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Okay, you have a bad stomach ache. You can take an oil and rub it there on the place, which is something people do even when they're not sick. And therefore, you're allowed to do that on Shabbat. This doesn't have to do with medicine. This has to do with, are you allowed to do an incantation? You can do an incantation for snakes and scorpions. If there's a snake coming to you, people would do these incantations and it would freeze the snake or scorpion in its place. Now, what's the issue here for Shabbat? Theoretically, you might have thought it's like capturing because you're making the snake freeze in his spot and not be able to move. But since that's not the typical way of capturing, usually you capture an animal and then you kill it, right? That's a whole different method of capturing. This is not really that, therefore it's permitted. And that's why we brought this, because it's about talking about incantations that people would use. Umavirin kli al gav ha'ayin b'Shabbat. This was like using an ice, putting ice on something. So they would use a vessel, maybe make it cold, and then put it on the eye to relieve the pain. Amara, or the swelling. Amara ben Shimon ben Gamliel b'midvarim. Well, you can do this as long as b'kli anital, as long as it's a utensil that's not muktzah. Aval b'kli she'eno nital, a kli that you're not allowed to move on Shabbat, asur. If it's muktzah, which would be, let's say, a kli she'melachto li'isur, a vessel used for forbidden purposes, then you wouldn't be able to use it here because it would be muktzah. Ve'ein shoalim b'dvar shedim b'Shabbat. And now we're going to get off on a really weird topic about if incantations weren't strange enough, people would talk to these evil spirits and ask them to help them with, some people say like if they lost something, they would use these call to the evil spirits to help them to find it and all sorts of things like that. So you can't ask for help from evil spirits on Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi Omer af bechol asur. Rabbi Yochanan says, what do you mean? Rabbi Yossi says, not just on Shabbat it's asur, it's forbidden even on a weekday. We're going to see why in a minute, why he thinks it's asur. Amar Rav Huna, and here interestingly we have different versions of what he says, whether ain or without the word ain. Halakha ke Rabbi Yossi. Okay, most Gersot say it should be ain halakha ke Rabbi Yossi. We actually don't paskin like Rabbi Yossi, and you can call in evil spirits even right when it's not Shabbat. You can't do it on Shabbat, but you can do it when it's not Shabbat. Why not on Shabbat? Because they call this uvdi dechol. It's like speaking like you do on a weekday, and you're supposed to speak differently, do things differently on Shabbat, and that's why you can't do it on Shabbat, but you can't do it on Yom Chol. Although some people think that Rav Huna says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, that you can't do it at all. And then they're going to say, Af Rabbi Yossi, lo amara, which makes it sound like we don't hold like Rabbi Yossi, but even Rabbi Yossi, because the word even here makes it sound like the real gear says, we don't hold like Rabbi Yossi. However, Rabbi Yossi himself even, lo amara ele mishum sakana. He really only said it, not that there's something inherently wrong with calling out the evil spirits, which you probably would have thought, right? It does sound not really like part of our value system. But Rabbi Yossi said it because of danger. And here we're going to give a story, which again, there's two different versions of exactly what happened in this story. Among the commentaries, how to understand this, he was swallowed up by a cedar tree. And a miracle happened to him. The tree opened up and spit him out. Sounds like Jonah and the whale. So some people say that what happened was there was an evil spirit chasing him, and he must have called the evil spirit for something. And then the evil spirit, as you're calling the evil spirit to help you, but sometimes the evil spirit could turn on you. And the evil spirit kind of was chasing him, and God made a miracle that he got swallowed up by the tree. And then when the evil spirit left, he got spit out by the tree. But it was kind of dangerous because at some point he was swallowed up in the tree and couldn't get out of there. Some people say it was the evil spirit that got him into the tree, and then a miracle happened and got him out of the tree. So two different versions of what exactly happened here. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright about this. You can do this. We talked about rubbing oil on your stomach on Shabbat. But you have to do it a little bit differently than you do it on Chol. This is what we call shinoi. It's a topic we learned about in Masachet Shabbat. If you change a little bit, right? We allow certain things, but when we're going to allow you to do it a little bit differently than you do it normally, right? And that also reminds you this is generally forbidden, but we're permitting it here. So what do we do? Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chanina Amar, Sach ba'acharkach memashmesh. First you put on the oil and then you rub it in. Now you would have thought that would be the normal way to do it, but apparently they did it the opposite. They would rub their body first and then they would put the oil on. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Sach memashmesh b'vat achad. He gives a different way to do it. Put it all on, do it all at the same time. Tanu Rabbanan. This is a bit of a weird one. Sarei shemen, if not all this stuff is a little bit weird. Sarei shemen b'sarei beitzim. Okay, these are evil spirits that dwelled or that were kind of came out from oil or eggs. Mutarim lish'ol bahem. You can basically ask them to help you. Why? Because they disappoint, meaning they don't work. So you could do it. I mean, it's kind of useless, but you could do it specifically because they don't work. Lochashim, right? If we talk about it's dangerous, well, these aren't dangerous because they don't have any power. Lochashim al shemen shebekli ve'en lochashim al shemen shebiyad. You can do an incantation with shemen that's in a vessel, but you can't do an incantation. Okay, this is people just didn't. Okay, you would have oil. If there was oil in it, we said this sarei shemen. These are evil spirits that would come out of the oil. People generally did incantations with oil that was in a vessel, but they never did incantations. If you pour oil in your hand, a little gross to do that, but if you pour oil in your hand and take it out of your hand, nobody would do incantations with oil in their hand. Therefore, lefichach, now we get to a different issue. Sachin mishemen shebiyad, you can use oil that's in someone's hand to put on your body. You don't have to worry that maybe somebody used this for an incantation and it has some evil spirit in it. And if you call up the evil spirit from the right, let's say someone had oil in their hand and they asked the evil spirit to come out of here and help them. So you don't want to use that oil because it's dangerous because there's an evil spirit in there, whatever exactly that means. So, but ein sachim b'shemen shebekli. So since people didn't really do incantations with oil in their hand, you can take oil from the hand and use it, to anoint on you, to put on your body, to rub on your body, because there's no worry there's going to be an evil spirit there. But if you take it from a vessel, you have to worry that maybe someone already kind of brought up the evil spirit from there, and there's an evil spirit in that oil, and you shouldn't therefore use it on your body because maybe it'll actually do something bad. That's a little bit of, again, strange and hard to understand this whole world of evil spirits. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta ikla lahu shpisa. So now we have a story. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel gets to an inn. I tell him mishcha b'mana. They gave him oil in a vessel. Shaf. He rubbed it on his body, and what can you imagine happened? Nav kalan simche ba'ape. He got boils all over his face. Nafik l'shuka. He goes out to the shuk. Now maybe he didn't see he had boils on his face. I'm not sure. But chazita yitita. A woman sees him with these boils on his face. Amra zika dechemet kachazina hacha. I see the evil spirit of chemet got to you because I see your face. I can see what happened to you. Avdale milta the itase. She did something, like she said some incantation, and he was healed. Okay, but here you see again, beware of taking oil out of a vessel when you don't know where the oil came from. Amalei Rabbi Abba le Rabba bar Meri. Okay, now we're going back to the pasuk. Okay, we're done with the incantations and all that, but we're going to finish up with a problem in this pasuk. Rabbi Abba said to Rabbi bar Meri, "K'tiv kol ha'machala shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo asim alecha ki ani Hashem rofecha." Okay, tell me if you figured out the problem. Don't put any, right? God says all the bad things I brought on, all the sicknesses, problems that I gave to Mitzrayim, I will not put on you because I'm God, your healer. Now, what's the problem? What do you need to be healed for? God is saying, I'm your healer that can heal you from sickness. But if God's not going to bring sickness upon us, then what do we need God to be a healer for? To which they answer, Rabbi Yochanan answered in a Rabbi bar Meri said to Rabbi Abba, who asked him this question, I heard Rabbi Yochanan say, Mikra ze me'atzmo nidrash. Okay, we can understand this pasuk from here. Shneimah, Vayomer im shamoa tishma lekol Hashem Elokecha. Okay, it says that this is the pasuk itself. Okay, this is the beginning of the pasuk. If you listen to the name of God, to what God says, and you do ayashar b'einav and all that, then kol ha'machala shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo asim alecha. So how do you read this pasuk? Im tishma lo asim. If you listen to me, I will not put any disease upon you. Im lo tishma asim. But if you don't listen to me, I will put upon you a disease. But even so, right? I can always heal you, though. In other words, even if you get sick because you're getting punished, God will still come and heal you. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana. Now, apropos someone being sick, so we're going to hear a story of Keshachala Rabbi Eliezer. We're now going to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, the famous one from the Tanur Shalachnai, the whole Lo B'Shamayim story. When Rabbi Eliezer was sick, Nichnasu Talmidav levaklo, his students came to visit him. Amar lahem, Chema azah yesh ba'olam. He said, there's a lot of anger in the world, and I'm getting punished because of God's anger at the world. That's what my suffering is for. Hitchilu heim bochim, so everyone started crying, as you can imagine. Rabbi Akiva misachek. Rabbi Akiva was laughing. This might remind you of the famous story of the Beit HaMikdash, right? They're all standing in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. We're going to get there soon. It's the last daf in Makot. So for Siyum Makot, which is a few weeks after Pesach, right? Everyone's looking, and there's a fox that comes out, and everybody's crying, and Rabbi Akiva's happy and laughing. And we'll get to that whole story when we get to it. Remember this story when we get there because it's very similar. Amrulo, lama tam misachek. This is why are you laughing? Amar lahem, this is why are you crying? Amrulo, if shar sefer Torah sharoi b'tzar v'lo nivkeh, could it be a sefer Torah is in distress and we're happy? We're not going to cry. Meaning, right? Rabbi Eliezer is representative of our Torah, and look, he's the greatest Torah scholar in our generation, and he's sick. We're going to cry. Amar lahem l'kach ani misachek. That's why I'm happy. שכל שאני רואה רבי שאין ינו מחמיץ ואין פשטנו לוקה ואין שמנו מבאיש ואין דושנו מדביש, every time I see my rabbi and his wine is in perfect shape, it didn't go sour, didn't turn to vinegar, and his flax didn't have any problems with it, and his oil and his honey, everything is perfect. Amari, right? Nothing's spoiled. Amarti shemachas v'shalom kibel Rabbi olamo. Maybe my rabbi got all his rewards in this world, and whatever punishment he has coming to him is going to come to him in the next world. That's not good. I don't want my rabbi to be punished in the next world. Now that I see his suffering, I'm happy. Because what? Because now I know he's getting punished for his sins in this world, and in the next world, he'll get all his rewards. We've seen this theme many, many times in the Gemara. Amar lo Akiva klum chisarta min Torah kula. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Akiva, is there something in the Torah that I didn't keep? Like, I'm a tzaddik. I've done everything right. I shouldn't be getting any punishment. I don't understand why I'm getting these yisurim. Or in other words, or again, he said it's because God is angry at the world, not at me. Amar lo limadatani rabbeinu. You taught us, Rabbi. Now, again, it could be he taught him, or it could be, remember, anytime you say something in front of your rabbi, you have to say, you taught us. Ki adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov v'lo yachtav. This is a pasuk, right, in Kohelet. There is no person who's a tzaddik who doesn't sin. Okay, meaning everybody does something wrong. You must have done something wrong, and on account of that, you're getting punished. Okay, second story with Rabbi Eliezer when he's sick and his students come to visit. Tanu Rabbanan, going to be somewhat similar. Kishachala Rabbi Eliezer when he was sick. Nichnesu arba'az kenim levakro. Four elderly, right, four rabbis basically came to visit him. Who are they? Very famous ones. Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azaliah, and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so those four rabbis come. What do they say? Each one says something. The first three are going to be very similar. Rabbi Akiva is going to be different than the rest, just as in the previous sugya. Rabbi Tarfon Pamar, Tovatali Yisrael mitipashal gshamim. You're greater than even drops of rain, right? Which everybody loves rain, but what? Tipashal gshamim ba'olam hazeh. Rain only helps us in this world. V'Rabbi ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. My rabbi, he helps us also in this world and also helps us get to the world to come. Now Rabbi Yeshua Pamar, Tovatali Yisrael yoter migalgal chama. You're better for us than the sun. Shagalgal chama ba'olam hazeh. Rabbi ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. Okay, the sun's rotation, right, it helps in this world, but you help us also in the world to come, right? Both in this world and in the world to come. Now Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah v'amar, Tovatal Yisrael yoter me'av ve'em. You're greater than a father and mother. Sha'av ve'em ba'olam hazeh. Your parents help you in this world, but Rabbi ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. You're helping us in this world and in the world to come. So they're all basically saying the same thing, just making the comparison to something else. Rabbi Akiva, Nana Rabbi Akiva v'amal, Chavivin Yisurin, how beloved is suffering. Okay, going back to the same theme. Amar lahem, Samchuni v'eshma'a divrei Akiva Talmidi, Sha'amar Chavivin Yisurin. So Rabbi Eliezer hears what everybody says, and he says, bring me closer. I want to hear more from Rabbi Akiva about what he said about the Yisurim Chavivin. Amar lo, Akiva zomin ayin lach. Where do you get this from, Akiva? What's your source? Amar mikra ani doresh. I darshan the following pasuk. Ben Shtem, notice in this version, he doesn't say, you taught us, right? These are just two different versions of probably of the same story. Ben Shtem shana Menashe b'malcho. We're going to learn it from Menashe, if you remember. He's one of the ones on the list of the three kings that doesn't get a portion in the world to come. Right? But there's this debate about him because he does do tshuva at the end of his life. And we're going to see what causes him to do tshuva. He was 12 when he became king. 55 shana malach b'Yerushalayim. He was a king for 55 years. If you remember, he was the son of Chizkiah. And then he goes bad. Okay, he's a terrible king. He does terrible things. And then the Assyrians come and they take him to Babylonia and they exile him. Okay, and then when he's in exile, we'll see he does tshuva there. So he does all bad in the eyes of God. And it says there, turning now to Amabet, Gam ele mishlei Shlomo. We're now in Sefer Mishlei. These are the mishalim of Shlomo. Asher he'etiku anshe Chizkiah melech Yehuda. The people of Chizkiah, the king of Yehuda, wrote them down. And what they assume this pasuk means is that what Rabbi Akiva is saying is it means Chizkiah was a great teacher. He was teaching all the Jews, like he wrote down the mishalim of Shlomo. He was what we call a marbitz Torah. Okay, spread Torah everywhere. Now the classic question about the rabbi whose son goes wayward. Could it be possible he taught Torah to everybody in the world, but not to his own son? It doesn't make sense. Chizkiah was this great king, was a great teacher, taught all the Jewish people, but didn't teach his son Torah? Couldn't be. Ela mikol torach shetarach bo, mikol amal she'amal bo. Okay, clearly spent a lot of effort on trying to get him to repent. Lo he'eleu lemutav eli yisurim. In the end, all of Chizkiah's attempts were to no avail. What helped him? Suffering. That's what brought him to repent. How do we know this? Shenema. It says about Menashe, this is a pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Divrei Yamim in general has this theme of reward and punishment and all that, so it fits with Divrei Yamim, with the book. Vayidaber Hashem Menashe ve'elamo ve'lo hikshivu. Okay, God spoke to Menashe and to the people, and they didn't listen. Vayaveh Hashem alehem, so God brought upon them Tzarei Tzava Asher L'Melech Ashur, the Assyrian army commanders. Vayilkedu, army officers, Vayilkedu et Menashe bechochim, Vayasruhu. Okay, they captured Menashe with hooks and they tied him up with they called them with Vasiyasru b'dechushatayim, with chains. Vayolichuhu bavela, and they take him to Babylonia and they exile him. Uchtiv, and then it says there, ube in Debrei Yamim, ube hitzavulo, and when he was suffering, chilat pnei Hashem Elohav, he turned to God, prayed to him, vayikana ma'od milifnei Hashem Elohei avotav, milifnei Elohei avotav, it should be. He surrenders to the God of his fathers. Vayitpalel elav, he praised him, vayater lo, vayishmat chinato, and God hears his prayer. Vayishivei Yerushalayim l'malchuto, and God brings him back to Jerusalem, back to being king. Vayeda Menashe ki Hashem Elohim, and there he understood that God was his God. Okay, so he repents at the end of his life, but what caused him to repent? Suffering, and that's why suffering is so good, and that's Rabbi Akiva's proof to Rabbi Eliezer. Halamadata, from here you learn Shechavivin Yisurim. Okay, apropos Menashe, we're now going to go off on a small tangent here. Tanu Rabbanan, Shlosha Ba'u Ba'alila. There were three who came, made like a sort of ultimatum to God or questioned God in a very brazen way. Elohim, Cain, Esav, Umenashe. Okay, Cain, Esav, and Menashe, we're now going to see how. Cain dichtiv, Gadol, Avonim, and so. Cain said, the sin is too heavy to bear, but they read it as a question. Gadol, Avonim, and so. Is this sin I did too heavy to bear? Amar lefanav, what do you say to God? Ribbono shalom, God, klum gadol avonim shishim ribo shatidim lachto lefanecha. Is my sin any greater than the 60,000 people that are going to sin to you in the Chet HaEgel? Okay, it wasn't all of them, let's say, but most of them that are going to sin to you in the sin of the golden calf, and you're going to forgive them. So, right, atasolech lehem. So what? You can't forgive me for what I did? Is what I did possibly worse than what 600,000 people did in the desert? Esav. What did Esav say? Dichtiv. Ha bracha chati l'chavi. Right after Yaakov steals his bracha, he says, what? My father, do you only have one bracha? And I guess I understand my father here to be God, that he's really coming with a question against God. Menashe, b'tchila kara le'lohut harbei. First, he prayed to other gods that they should help him, and that's where he was brazen against God. But then he finally turns to God at the end of his life. Now we get back to the Mishnah. Another person who doesn't have a part in the world to come is someone who says the Shema Mefurash, the whole, right, the special name of God. Now, it's a little bit strange because we say this in the temple, right? There's certain times when you do say the Shema Mefurash. So a Braita says, Tana ubi gvulin ubi lashon hagah. You're going to get this punishment if you do it outside of the temple. And b'lashon hagah, so there's different interpretations of what this means. We'll go with, some people think this means if you use it, you say it in a different language, like, you say it in English or something, or in Greek or something like that. Now we get to the next part of the Mishnah, which will take us for a while because we're going to go through all these 3 kings and 4 regular people who don't have a share in the world to come. Today we're going to start with Yeravam. Yeravam. So what we're going to do with each name, first we're going to say is, what's the drasha of the person's name? There's this assumption that people have names, they're like pen names, and they're meant to be darshaned. So, which means like it wasn't necessarily the real name. It's a name they're given because their name is representative of who they are. Tanu Rabbanan, Yeravam, Sheriba'am, that he brought down the people. Davar Acher, a different interpretation, Yeravam, Sha'asam Meriva Ba'am, he created a fight among the nation, because remember, it was all him that caused the split of the kingdom. Davar Acher, Yeravam, Sha'asam Meriva Ben Yisrael Avihan Shebashamayim. Remember about Yeravam, the main thing they say about him is he caused a lot of people to sin. Asher He caused others to sin. So he created a fight between God and the Jewish people. Ben Nivat. Why is he the son of Nivat? What does that mean? Ben Sheni Beit Velo Ra'ah. He's the son who saw a sign but didn't understand it properly. Okay, I assume what they mean here. It's not so clear because they're going to go off on Nivat and seeing signs and not understanding. They're actually going to say it about his father. Okay, but if you say it about him, right? He had a sense that he was supposed to, right? First of all, he got a prophecy, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, that he's supposed to be king, but he didn't understand it properly. He took it to the wrong place. Okay, By the way, since I recorded the Shabbat daf, I made one error, so I want to correct it in advance, opposed to after the fact. When Achiyah Shiloni comes, he basically takes his cloak and he tears it into 10, 12 pieces, and he gives Yeravam 10, saying you're going to have the 10 tribes. But I said that I was confusing I got confused about whose cloak it was. I said it was Yeravam's cloak, but it's not. It's Achiyah's cloak. Okay, he takes his own simla and then he rips it up into pieces. So I'm correcting that in advance. Okay. Um, so now we're going to talk about Yeravam. Okay, let me just give you some background for those who might not be familiar with Yeravam. Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, becomes king after Shlomo, and then he gets people upset with him because he decides to tax the people, even though they tell him not to. He listens to his advisors, who are like these young people, and they advise him, yeah, keep the taxes high, and people get very upset. And then also at the same time, Achiyah is telling Yeravam, you're going to become the king, and there basically becomes this split in the kingdom, which actually was, say, like a schism already before. You see these stories which Sheva ben Bichri we're going to mention today, where there's already Ishu Dan Neged Ish Yisrael, even in the time of David. There was already these camps, and he just kind of, like the straw that broke the camel's back. And split actually happens in his time, and he becomes king over the 10 tribes. One of the things we're going to see he does, he ends up he puts these two eglei zahav, these two golden calves, one in Dan, one in Beersheba, and basically doesn't allow the people, he puts up blockades so the people can't go back to the temple. And he sort of creates his own religion. Like he does the holiday in a different month. He does a lot of different things, and he creates his own religion. And almost like in the, as we say, the Hashra'ah, like with he tries to be like Aharon. He's basically saying, I'm giving you the Aharon Torah. Like you guys do the Moshe, I do the Aharon. He calls his son Nadav and Aviyah, or at least by the Torah, they're called that, right? Making a clear reference to Aaron. He says when he puts up the Eglei Zahav, Eila Elohecha Yisrael, which is just like Aaron says, okay? And the Eglei Zahav is obviously Aaron does. And he's trying to say, we're doing something different, but within the framework of this, okay? And obviously it's all bad. And then he gets the people to worship idols, these Eglei Zahav, terrible thing. Okay, that's in a quick synopsis. So now we say, Tana hu Nevat, hu Micha, hu Sheva ben Bichri. His father, Nevat, was also Micha, who does Pesel Micha, if you remember. He also creates this Pesel. And Sheva ben Bichri, right, and he takes this Levi and he has him working for him. This is in Sefer Shoftim. All these people, okay, now whether they're all the same person is a good question. Sheva ben Bichri also has this split, like I told you, Ish Yudah, Ish Israel. They seem to be connecting all these people who do the same kind of thing. Okay, they created like a split in the people. And now, whether they really mean they're actually the same people or they just mean they did similar things. Now we're going to learn about all three of them. Tanu Rabbanan, Shloshan Nibtu v'lo ra'u. What else is similar about them? They each saw a sign but didn't understand it properly. Micha, sorry, I skipped some. Oh, did I skip? Sorry, I skipped a line before. Nivat, what's the meaning of his name? Shenibat v'lo ra'ah. Why is he called Nivat? Because he saw the sign and didn't understand it. Micha shenit machmech bebinyan. He was crushed in the building in Egypt. And Mashmo, what's his real name? Sheva ben Bichri Shmo. Okay, his real name is Sheva ben Bichri. That's why they're saying they're all really one and the same. Okay, they say, right, they put him in the building instead of bricks, like they kind of used him as bricks. I don't know exactly the meaning of that part. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, Shloshan Nibtu v'lo ra'u, ve'eluhen Nevat, Achitophel, v'Tzagnei Paro. Now we're going to see there were three people like Nevat who all saw some sign and didn't understand it. Okay? So who are these people? Nevat, Achitophel, and Tzagnei Paro. The Tzagnei of Paro were the ones who were trying to help Paro figure out how to deal with the Jewish people problem. And, that they saw as a problem. Achitophel was David's advisor, but then turns to Avshalom and basically helps in the rebellion of Avshalom. And we're going to see today why Gemara says, why this Breita thinks he helped. Navat ra esh yotzah me'amato. He saw fire coming out of his private part. Hu saval ihu malich. He thought fire coming out of my private parts. That means, that's my position of strength. That shows I'm a born leader and I'm meant to be the king. But Lohi, he was confused. Because what's his private part a sign of? Of children who will come from him. Yeravam, who did not mine. It was Yeravam who was going to come out of him that was going to be the ruler. Achitophel, ra'at sarat, shezor chalo alamato. Again, by his private parts, but something else. He saw leprosy. Hu savar iu malach. I don't know why leprosy should be a sign of king, but he thought, I'm going to be king. And then that's why he helped Avshalom. Why did he help Avshalom if he wanted to be king? Because he figured I can't outwit David, but if I get Avshalom to be king, then I can rebel against Avshalom. So that was his whole tactic. But Velohi. But it wasn't true. Batsheva bitohu denafik min Shlomo. It was his descendants that were going to be, which is his daughter Batsheva, who's going to give birth to Shlomo, who was going to be king. Again, same kind of idea. It's Tagnine Paro. This is very famous. What was their mistake? Well, they saw the Amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina, my dechtiv. Okay, he explains this. My dechtiv hema me meriva. When it comes to the waters, right, that brought Moshe's decline. So it says these are the main meriva sheravu b'nei Israel et Hashem vayikadesh bam. These are the waters that caused the fighting. Now, these as if like they were waters we knew of before. So what does that mean? Hey, that's what the drasha is going to assume. These were the waters that those who looked at the stars for Pharaoh and tried to predict the future, they saw this and they were confused. They made a mistake. They saw that the person who's going to save the Jewish people is going to be killed by water, right? That brings Moshe's downfall when he hits the rock instead of speaking to it to get the water for the Jewish people. Amru, so they said, every Jewish boy is born, let's throw him into the Yeor. And that way, the water, they figured that will fulfill what the stars were telling them. But they didn't understand it wasn't that water that was going to kill Moshe. That water actually saved Moshe. It was water later in his life. How do we know Yeravam's not making it into the world to come? Same thing we keep seeing. Okay, and this caused the sin of Beit Yeravam and to destroy and wipe out, or to wipe out and destroy from the Pnei Adama, from the ground, from the world. Why do you have the double language? One for Olam Hazeh, one for Olam Haba. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, why did he become king? Because he rebuked Shlomo. Why was he punished? Because when he rebuked him, he did it in public and he went too far. It's like saying the same thing he did was both good and bad. Okay, and we're going to see it right now what it was. Shenemal, this is the scene right before Achiash Shiloni comes to prophesy to Yeravam that he's going to be king. It says, V'zeh davar asher harim Yad b'melech. Okay, the first thing you need to know is the pasuk before says, Vayarim Yad b'melech. First it says, here's Yeravam. They introduce him, and then they say he went up against the king. And then it says, and this is what he did to go up against the king. So there's a little bit of a double language here, and then we're going to come back to that. So this pasuk just says, this is what he did. He said, Shlomo banat hamilo sagaret peretz ir David. Shlomo built this Milo, and he covered up the breach in the city of David. Amrlo, David, what was he really saying? David avicha paras parzo b'chomach Yisrael regel. David HaMelech opened up these ways in the gates to make it easier for people to get to Jerusalem. Now remember, there was no temple at the time, but so that when Shlomo built it, they'd be able to get to Jerusalem easily. Atagadarta otam kedela sonan garia lebat paro. But you closed them up and built this Milo for Bat Paro, for the daughter of Paro, your wife, so that you could collect a tax, and everyone who goes through has to pay, and you're basically preventing people from going on Aliyah L'Regel, which is ironic, because we're going to see that that's what Yeravam does in the end. He prevents people from going on Aliyah L'Regel. But at this point, he was in a better place. So that he was right for rebuking Shlomo for doing this. My v'zeh sheririm Yad b'melech. Why does it say it twice in the pasuk before and also in the next pasuk? Right? They don't even quote the pasuk before. Some people say this is the wrong girsan. It should have quoted the pasuk before. But the point is, why does it say this if it already said in the pasuk before? Rav Nachman shechalatz tefillah b'fanav. He also did something else, which is he took off his tefillin in front of Shlomo, which was disrespectful. Amar Rav Nachman, Gasut haruach shayabo b'Yeravam teradito min ha'olam. What caused Yeravam to go bad? And he was a good king, and he was a good person. In the end, right? God chose him to be the king, and here he rebuked Shlomo for something bad that he had done. And what made him turn? So they say, and particularly, it's even this issue of if he was so critical of Shlomo for making it hard for the Jews to go on Aliyah L'Regel, how did he do that? So what was it? It was Gasura Ruach. It was arrogance. Shneamar, right? The big thing that brings the downfall of many people, as we know, especially leaders. Shneamar v'yom Yeravam bilibo. He said in his heart, Atata shuva mamlacha lebeit David. What happened? He became king. He said, but the people are going to just go back to David, kingdom of David. If they go to the Beit HaMikdash, they're all going to go back to Rechavam. Remember, the Beit HaMikdash was in Rechavam's territory, and also v'haraguni, and they'll kill me. V'shavu el Rechavam melech Yehuda, and then they're going to kill me and go back to him. So now, what was the issue though? It was this: Amar gemire de ein yeshiva b'azara ela l'malchei Beit Yehuda. If I go to the temple, we're going to have two kings there. But what's going to happen? There's a rule. No one is allowed to sit in the Azara unless you're a king of the Davidic dynasty. So, right, bilvad. Only they can sit. So they're going to see Rechavam sitting. And I'm standing. They're going to say he's the king and he's the slave. If I sit, they'll say I'm rebelling against the king, treason, and they'll kill me. And then they'll follow him. So what did he do? It is what I explained. He makes two eglei zahav. He says, don't go to Jerusalem anymore. Only come here. And he puts one in Beta, one in Dan to make it easier for people to get there, right? So you don't have to go from all the way north back down south, right? Let's make it easy. You have two places. My vayiva eitz. Now we're going to start and finish with this word vayiva eitz. What does it mean? Who did he advise with? I'm Rabbi Yehuda Shoshiv Rashayit Tzaddik. He put together evil people and good people. Amar lahem chatmitu al kol da'avdina. He said, will you sign off on everything I do? Amar lahem. They said, sure, right? At that point, he was a good guy. Everyone agreed. Amar lahu. Malkabina lemehave. I want to be the king. Is that good? Amar lahem. They said, sure, we'll sign off on that too. Kol da'amina lechu avditu. You'll do anything I say? They said, sure. Afilu lemiflach lavodah zara. You'll even worship idols? Even if I tell you, like, worship idols, will you listen to me? Tzaddik. Chas v'shalom. Tzaddik said, no way, no how. Amar le rasha tzaddik. But the evil person turned to the tzaddik and said to him, Salcha da'atach tegavra ki Yeravam palach lavodah zara? What, you think Yeravam is going to worship avodah zara? Of course he's not going to worship avodah zara. Ela lemesinhu. He's just testing you to see how loyal are you willing to be. He doesn't really mean it. And with that, he convinced even the tzaddik to sign off on Yeravam. Oh, yeah, sure. If you want to worship avodah zarah, no problem. We're with you. And that's the vayiva eitz. And we're going to start tomorrow with even Achiyash Shiloni signed off on this too. Okay, that's tomorrow. So what did we do? We started off with the how you read the psukim. We finished with the pasuk in Mishlei, the Tov, Lev, Mishna Tamid, and the Kol Yimei Ani Ra'im. From there, we got to the how to say psukim in the Torah, right? What's appropriate about, and what way can you read them, and what way can't you read them? We got to incantations, all sorts of incantations, and what you could do for medicinal purposes on Shabbat, calling up evil spirits also. And then we got to the story of Rabbi Eliezer and his suffering, and what were the reactions to that. Particularly, we were interested in Rabbi Akiva. From there, we got to we went back to the Mishnah, Hogeh b'Shem, someone who says God's name, in what situation, and then we got to Yeravam, and we darshaned all the things, started anyway, the drashot about Yeravam. We're going to continue them tomorrow. What's the meaning of his name? What did he do wrong? Why did he lose his part in the world to come? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shnishma B'Sorot Tovot.